Did anyone who just walked in not have an assessment form? Folks have it? Okay. You'll have to fill out the first 2 pages. So if you don't have it, please let me know. So this is an Undocu-Ally training. It was developed by my team at the Immigrant Student Success Center. It's specifically to make sure that faculty, staff, and educators are provided with the proper knowledge to support undocumented students. So I'm gonna go over what we're actually gonna talk about, what the agenda looks like. There's gonna be some activities. I know you all already had a long day, or some of you have just gotten here. They will be interactive, so I hope you have the energy for it. But we'll work together through some of those things. And so I'll go ahead and get started. The agenda, so we're gonna go through the guidelines of this training, some of the goals and community agreements moving forward, student narratives, and specifically what are some of the terminologies that you all need to know when working with undocumented and immigrant students, mental health, so how does that impact undocumented students specifically, and we'll talk through that through a spoken word activity and through a guide that you'll be working through with a partner. Education, so education is intrinsically tied with immigration, and we see that with legislation coming out like the New York Dream Act, like DACA, that have some education component to it. And policies, so what are some policies that impact undocumented students that you may not be aware of, or that you may know some information about but aren't quite sure. And so the goals of this training is to challenge your understanding on immigration and undocumented immigrant students. It's to develop a network of advocates at John Jay College, but I understand some of you are not from John Jay College, so this is an opportunity for you all to develop a network of advocates in your spaces. Effectively referring and providing mental health support for undocumented students. I know some of the departments that are essentially trained to refer students to mental health resources. Are folks here generally trained in that, or some folks have not been trained in that? Okay, so I'll cover that briefly, but if you have any questions, please let me know. To understand the significance of education in the immigration discussion. So like I said, immigration and education are intrinsically tied by legislation, and to demystify the impact of deportation policies on the lives of undocumented students. So what are some of the community agreements moving forward with this presentation? Confidentiality is one of them. So some of your peers are present here. We don't want to share the name of students that we're working with that have identified to you as being undocumented to your peers or to the general public here. We want to make sure that remains confidential. So similarly, anything that is also shared here stays here. Be cognizant of your learning moments and your triggers. So I don't know most of you, I don't know a lot of you. If there's at any point where you need to step away because a video can be triggering, because what we're talking about is really heavy and it impacts you directly, please do so at any moment. I will let you know when we'll start talking about things that are particularly heavy to discuss. So expect and accept discomfort and non-closure. So again, this training may challenge some ideas you have about immigration. It may challenge ways in which you've understood working with undocumented students. Embrace that uncomfortability. It often leads to learning opportunities and some growth. Do not use the I word when referring to undocumented students. Can someone tell me what the I word is? Yes, thank you. I asked that question because when I ask that question, often folks will say immigrant. Immigrant is not a slur. So we don't want to use the word illegal when referring to our students. And ask questions. So this is the moment to ask those questions. There is no stupid question, there's no dumb question. Please ask them. Any other things that folks want to add to the community agreements? Anything that also folks want to be discussed? Okay, so move forward. So the first activity, I have a handout for you all. I encourage you all, if you're able to stand and walk around and ask folks these questions. But if you're unable to, that's fine. Essentially, I'll be handing out a worksheet that has a bingo sheet on it. It will have a series of words, keywords, terminology that is specifically related to the undocumented student experience. Please ask your neighbor, someone in front of you, someone behind you, if they know any of the definitions. If they do, please write their name on it. Any you're welcome to write your name on it as well. Thank you. And then whoever fills out the whole bingo sheet, because there's enough people here to fill out the whole bingo sheet, will win a t-shirt from the center. So there is some competition to it. So we're having the handouts being passed out right now. If you need a pen, please let me know. We have pens here, but go ahead and get started. So let's get started with undocumented. So someone who lacks the appropriate documentation to establish permanent residency. What about DACA? Yes, in that it provides folks an opportunity to be able to showcase, like, I am here and I want to be able to have access to these resources. Even without DACA, folks are submitting taxes. You don't need DACA to submit tax. Yeah. How often do folks have to renew? Every 2 years. How much does it cost? $500, $495. How much is it going to go up to? $795. So students who have this have to renew every 2 years. So they have to pay that every 2 years. TPS. So status granted to individuals whose countries of origins are such that they are unable to return safely or the country is unable to adequately handle their return. So as a note, TPS is given to the country and individuals can apply. But an individual cannot apply for TPS unless the country has been designated to have TPS. You're right in that it does expire and folks have to renew. The Trump administration is trying to remove TPS completely. And so we're seeing that students are having their TPS expired and they're unsure about whether it's going to stay. Some of them have been renewed. Some of them have been made available. But it's an ongoing fight with different legal organizations. So I think Sudan is set to expire this year now. And so it's another legal fight to keep it again. So if someone loses TPS, if TPS is expired, they become undocumented. Any visa has a pathway to citizenship. But again, you have to apply for the visa first. You have to get it. You have to have it for a certain amount of years. Then you apply for legal permanent residency, which is like a test, an interview. Then you have to have that for a certain amount of years. And then you can apply for citizenship. So it's not an easy process. Okay, next terminology, dreamer. Oh, sorry.
I know that DREAMers is the Development Relief Education Alien Minors Act. It's for children who are born here as minors.
Who are brought here, yes. Sorry,
Born
they
here
said
as
born here,
minors,
yes.
right? And then they go to school and it's a way for them to get legal status or eventually get legal status.
Mm-hmm. Did it pass?
It passed, is it March? No, it didn't pass yet, right?
No.
Okay.
It was, thank you so much. It was proposed in 2009. It passed the House and it did not pass the Senate. And so it would have provided a pathway to citizenship for folks who would have been able to identify with the eligibility requirements, but it has not passed. I think what you might have been thinking of is the New York Dream Act, which is, so yes. So thank you for noting the act that name is based off of. So we often call undocumented students dreamers, and it's because of that legislation. But what ends up happening is that then we start confusing the legislation because we put dreamer on everything. We call students dreamers, and then students get confused. So one example of that is students who are interested in applying to the New York Dream Act think that they need to have DACA because DACA folks are defined as dreamers, and so then don't apply for the New York Dream Act. So this is why dreamer is a complicated term. And so dreamer is really more of a political term. So it does refer to the U.S. Dream Act, the Federal Dream Act that was attempted to pass, but it did not pass. And so students may not identify with this term for several reasons, because the Federal Dream Act did not pass, because the idea of a dreamer student is someone who is in school, who was brought here at a young age, and so then who's worthy of being here. But that places then parents or other community members in the subject of not being worthy of being here because they're not dreamers. And so some folks may not identify with that term. So it's a complicated term. Let's not use it loosely because folks get confused when we start doing that. Is dreamer clear for folks? Yes, so the Federal Dream Act was initially, it was initiated in 2009 by a group of students, youth advocates. They are no longer eligible for the U.S. Federal Dream Act in its iteration. Yeah. It hasn't been initiated since then, but they wouldn't have been eligible if it does pass. Cool. New York Dream Act. Everyone here should know Oh, wait. The suspense.
So it's the act that allows undocumented individuals without any status to get access to New York State financial aid. It also includes access to New York State financial aid for individuals who currently do not reside in New York State but have graduated from a New York State high school.
Yes. Yeah. Great job, financial aid. I think whenever I have these trainings and I give that question to other departments, so like student affairs, academic counseling, it's never that concrete. It's like, I think it's an act that does this. So thank you. So these are the terminologies that are, oh, I was going to touch upon the U visa and SIJ overlap. The difference with the two being that SIJ, there doesn't need to be any kind of police investigation involved to apply for SIJ. For U visa, you do have to have police investigation. And these are some of the terms that are just important to know as you work with your students. There are more. They're all on this bingo sheet. So please engage with it and look for more answers. New York Dream Act. Folks are eligible for it so long as you don't have a lawful status. You have DACA, U visa, T visa, or TPS. But if you have asylum granted, you have access to FAFSA. So that's like one part of the financial benefit. There's a lot of scholarships specifically for DACA folks, so that's also another benefit. DACA, you're able to work. That's another financial benefit. What students are trying to navigate, so you all have begun learning and engaging with this in like the 20 minutes that we've had a conversation about this. But students are in real time trying to figure out what these words mean. Often their parents may not want to share information with them fully because they want to protect them, because they want to make sure they handle something before they ask any questions to the students or give them any responses. So students are also trying to figure out what they apply to and what they don't apply to. So I think one thing that I want to highlight, and I highlight this throughout the presentation, is practicing patience and understanding with our students because they may not be fully aware of their statuses either. So I have a fellowship program through our center. They go to high schools to support undocumented students in different high schools across the city. In one of the high schools, the student mentioned, I have asylum, can I apply for FAFSA? And the fellows explained, if you have asylum granted, yes, you can. And the student was like, yes, I do. And our students asked them, can you bring in the documentation just so that we're sure the students brought the documentation, but it was expired. So they didn't have asylum granted. And so these are things that our students may not know and aren't familiar with. So we have to be patient when engaging with them on these things. Just as I have patience right now with you all learning these words and engaging with this. We all want to learn together in that sense. Okay, so I'll move forward. So this is just kind of a brief rundown of the differences between DACA and not having DACA. So the first four, whether you have DACA or not, you have access to them, or you're under this rubric. So with or without DACA, you are not eligible for federal programs. So you all know this because you're financial aid, not eligible for FAFSA. With or without DACA, you can get a driver's license as of last month. So now folks can get driver's license regardless of immigration status. Other states already have this. California already have this. I just mentioned that to put us kind of in the same framework of what the rest of the country is doing. With or without DACA, not eligible for certain careers and licensure because background checks may be required. An easy example, and we get that a lot because of John Jay College of Criminal Justice, is that students are undocumented and they are interested in being police officers. They cannot be police officers even with DACA because you have to have citizenship for that. Fear of deportation. So DACA technically provides protection from deportation, but we're seeing that folks with DACA are still being deported. So both still experience a fear of deportation for themselves and for their family members. The difference is, if you have DACA, you are eligible for health insurance with the exception of the Affordable Care Act. You have a social security number and you're able to work. You have work authorization, which means you are eligible to apply for paid internships and fellowships. And you are eligible to travel within the United States utilizing your DACA card, including Puerto Rico. That does not include the Virgin Islands and does not include Guam. But with the Real ID Act that's coming out, that could implicate the traveling for some folks. So we're still kind of seeing how that's going to turn out. But if folks didn't have DACA and they were traveling with a passport or another form of identification, like a New York City ID, the Real ID Act is now the only way to get on a plane once the legislation passes. And so folks would be limited to traveling. So these are things your students may not know, are seeking to know, and are also like trying to balance knowing that and navigating their school. Okay. Yes. I don't want to go too deeply into the Real ID Act. Essentially, everyone here has to get a new ID because some states have different, like when I was in Arizona, your license expired after 30 years. And so you look like a little kid when you get it renewed, and then you're like an adult now. And so they're just trying to like make it all equal across the states. But what that means is that to get the Real ID star, you have to show social security number, and you have to show that you're a citizen certificate. Yes, but it's birth certificate or social security card. No, or because I already got it, and I only need a social security card. Yeah. Okay. So things are happening, but essentially, you need that to get on a plane from now on. After, I think in New York it's in October where it's going to go into effect. October. So yeah, if folks don't have it, y'all need to get on it. But that implicates students who don't have any other form of identification to travel with. Okay. So I'll move forward. So impacts and barriers as they pertain to undocumented students navigating these kinds of institutions. So barriers to public benefits that I just mentioned: no pathway to citizenship or residency. So just to be clear, most undocumented students do not have a pathway to citizenship. Higher education unaffordable and limited leads students to defending and surviving instead of living and thriving. And so, like I said, some licensure and professional licenses require state verification, so it can vary from state to state. For example, in California and New York, folks who are undocumented are able to practice law. Other states, that is not the case. It's harder to travel domestically due to limited access to state ID, what we just talked about. Not eligible for many paid internships that are funded or connected to state or federal funding, and many come from low-income backgrounds, which means that they're already struggling to support their family. How are they going to support themselves? And so one thing that I do want to note is that if your campus has access to private money, that can be utilized into a fellowship that can pay undocumented folks. So undocumented folks can work, they just can't be on payroll. And so so long as you do through an LLC, or you have independent contracting, or the money is private at a college, at a CUNY, then you're able to engage and work. There are several different websites that have guides on that. Immigrants Rising, the New York State Youth Leadership Council. These are all websites that have guides on how students can do that regardless of immigration status. So I'm not going to go deep into that. We also want to bear in mind that it's not just status that impacts undocumented students, just like any other students. Students come in with a set of intersectional identities, and those are also things that we need to keep in mind to fully support them. So one example is the Undocu-Black Network. So they do a really good job at highlighting the way that undocumented Black immigrants are more marginalized than any other immigrant group. One example is undocumented Black immigrants are more likely to be deported than any other immigrant group, but they are the smallest immigrant group. And so we Hispanic or Latinx undocumented folks, Asian undocumented folks are less likely to be deported than Black undocumented folks. So this is why we also need to keep in mind how race plays a role in these things. Queer, trans people of color, so undocumented trans folks are also more likely to experience homelessness, more likely to experience sexual assault, more likely to commit suicide. And so what does it mean when there's a lack of resources available for trans folks, and then you add status to it, and that makes it even more difficult. And lastly, a group just to highlight is deported veterans. So there's like initiatives in the 90s and 80s where they were telling folks, if you are undocumented and you join the military, we'll give you citizenship. That is not true. You need to be a legal permanent resident to join the Army, and then they can expedite your citizenship process. But if you're undocumented, you will not get citizenship process, or you will not get citizenship. And so folks served their country and then came back and they were deported. And so there's a house in Tijuana that specifically works with deported veterans. Some folks were also legal permanent residents and they were deported. So then when we look at mental health specifically for undocumented students, We see that it's a combination of fear, so fear of deportation, of family separation, anxiety. So students are unsure about their future, how they're going to be able to work when they graduate, are they going to be able to use their degree? Pressure to succeed and to go to college and support their family. Shame, so blaming themselves. I think often too, just from the conversation we were having earlier, is people like us can shame our students and we end up shaming them. So we shame poor students for not making enough money. We shame students for not submitting things on time. We shame students for not being as knowledgeable about their own experience. That also adds to the pressure of students thinking, well, I can't show them that I'm poor. I can't show them that I don't know how to process this because it's my experience. So I'm just going to alienate myself so I don't have to be a part of this conversation. And depression, which leads to substance abuse and suicide. So our undocumented students are navigating these mental health barriers, and often there's very little resources available for undocumented students with regards to counseling and any kind of psychotherapy services. And so students are struggling with that. Especially, there are very few, if any, undocumented or formerly undocumented therapists. And so that also makes it a really difficult support system. So we're gonna watch a video. This is one of the videos that I just wanna give a content warning about. But what I want you to keep in mind is the trigger that she's talking about. So there's something that happens that reminds her of an event that had happened. And so the next activity is gonna delve deeply about that and how your different spaces could also may also be triggering students in some of the questions that are asked and some of the comments that are made. So keep that in mind. Keep your department in mind while watching this video.
My piece is called A Knock on the Door. Thump, thump. The vibrating sound of knuckles pounding against the wooden door of my apartment penetrates through the walls. I'm in the middle of reading my Facebook wall updates. I just found out that my friends Katie and Chris got engaged. I didn't even know they were dating. I knew there was something fishy about them spending too much time together. But all of a sudden, I hear the noise coming from the door. Thump, thump. Slowly, I close my laptop, turn my radio off, and lean closer to make sure I wasn't imagining the sound. Thump, thump. The unmistakable noise indicating someone's presence at the front door. I wonder who it is. Could it be my uncle? No, it can't be him. He would have called before coming. He knows better. Should I open the door? Thump, thump. As if a rewind button was pressed in my memory, my mind travels back 5 years ago. The door creaks as I open it, early on a cold winter morning, 5 days before Christmas. 2 officers in navy blue uniforms with the letters ICE written all over their suits enter my home, pretending to be police looking for a man they knew did not live within the house. We're looking for a man named Juan Gonzalez. He listed this address as his residence. Is he home? We don't know that person, my mom answers. Ma'am, we apologize. We must have been mistaken. Can I see your ID? Don't worry, it's just part of the process. Thump, thump. Ma'am, are you aware that you and your family have an order of deportation? Thump, thump. I feel the cold metal against my skin as I place handcuffs around my hands and chain them to my stomach. I see the frightened faces on my mom and my sister as they are being patted down while the officers are doing the same to me. I hear my mom's pleading voice. Why are you doing this? What did we do wrong? Please, don't hurt my daughters. Thump, thump. The sound brings me back to the present. Are they coming for me? Again? Or are they here to take away the rest of my family members? Are they here to tear my heart into more pieces? Have they not inflicted enough pain upon my family and me? I peek through the cracks of my bedroom door, making sure their eyes are not peering through the windows. Quietly, I tiptoe on the soft carpet to the front door, hoping they can't hear my heart beating quickly. After traveling what seemed like 12 miles, when instead it was 12 feet, I reach the front door. I peer through the hole in the door. A man in a brown uniform, alone, holding a square package in his hand. I breathe a sigh of relief. I open the door. Delivery for Nadia. Can you please sign here? Thank you.
Well, this is a very specific case. What I want you to keep in mind when working on this activity is the way that certain questions, comments, policies can trigger students into thinking that this is a dangerous situation. The examples provided here are specifically for financial aid, because a good majority of you are from financial aid. But for other departments, please keep in mind how your department could be participating in this or not. One example is that's provided on the worksheet is when students are asked for their social security number to look up their information on CUNY first. So social security number, not everyone has one. We can also just ask for a last name or an impl ID number, but the social security number triggers students into thinking, what other entities are asking me for a social security number? The police can sometimes ask for that. ICE asks for that. Other federal agencies ask for that. That's a number that I may not have. And that's a number that already lists me as this person doesn't have it, something's wrong with them, or they could be undocumented. So that's an example of it. There are others provided on the sheet, but what I want you to do is to essentially list the trigger that, or the stress that students are experiencing in the first column. The second column is what is your department doing that's eliciting that trigger? And the last column, what can be done to change that? So for this activity, work with someone next to you to fill out this document, and then we'll come back as a group to discuss.
Hello, everybody. So I work with MPA students, and I'm a career advisor. And one of the things I thought was like students being asked to create resumes and being ashamed of their work experience, or not knowing if they should include their work experience from their home country. And I guess one of the school structures and practice that lists the stresses is making it mandatory and required resumes for applications to opportunities. Or even like using JGCO, John Jay Careers Online, to create a profile with the resume could kind of, I guess, elicit those stressors. Ways to combat that, I guess, is to utilize different formats of resumes to showcase their skills and showcase their qualifications and get students involved on campus that gives them those transferable skills at jobs so they don't have to put a lot of focus on their previous experiences.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Wait, what's your t-shirt size?
I don't know if that has anything to do with, I'm sorry, something that just occurred to me because I faced similar issues before. There's a mentality in our society, and like we were talking about with the present administration, of what kind of experience, like if you're a doctor, most of the medical knowledge is about the same, but you need these different licenses. That doesn't change the idea that you were a doctor. I think what I'm going to like, well, you have experience in England. That's awesome. You have experience in Mexico. Too bad.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that kind of mentality that sometimes one country, being an immigrant from a specific country is better than being an immigrant from a different one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oh, you're coming from Africa. Oh, you're coming from Australia. Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, you know, kind of a change of ideas. There are a lot of experiences that it doesn't matter where you got them. They're still very useful and relatable. Like if you know how to file, it's still good if you learn it in Latin America or if you learn it here.
Mhm.
If you learn, a couple of programming courses, they're about the same. So I don't know.
Yeah.
It's something that bothers me from time to time.
Yes.
That depending on what country you're coming from, your immigration status, it might be the same.
Yes.
Even, yeah, sorry.
No, absolutely. I think there is definitely a different kind of stigma that we put to certain countries, and that's a great way to add to her comment. But I'm also looking at what you wrote on your sheet. Is there anything that you want to share about the sheet? Okay, perfect. Okay. Anyone? No, because that wasn't the activity. No. Okay. Who wants to share what they wrote? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
It's okay. So we talked about we're from SASP, and so we do student academic success programs, and we're constantly either sharing postgraduate planning ideas or our opportunities or scholarship opportunities, but we're just talking about doing a better job of thinking about undocumented students, because we might have them in our cohorts, but we're blasting scholarship opportunities or blasting postgraduate opportunities, and they're not technically they're exclusive. They're not inclusive. So that's definitely something that students may be stressed about. So doing a better job of identifying opportunities for which they are eligible for. I know for my particular program, I talked about looking and reviewing our program site, to make sure any language that may seem like it, doesn't take them into account is also removed and changed.
Yeah, that's a great example. Thank you. I think definitely sharing information with students who wouldn't fit necessarily the experience of being able to apply to all scholarships. Oh, I think there was someone over there. Sorry. Oh, I think she was first. Oh, really? Oh, sorry. I'm not looking in this direction. Um, but I think that's a great point. I also believe in not reinventing the wheel. So our center has, specifically for John Jay, our center has a listserv where we email twice a month with scholarships specifically for undocumented students, with job opportunities specifically for undocumented students, and fellowships, including events. So if your campus has one of these centers, which it doesn't unless you're Brooklyn, then I encourage you to reach out to that office and send over those resources. And if not, definitely creating them is really important, or seeking them out. Thank you. What's your t-shirt size?
Hi, we're from UMI, and what we came up with is similar to the previous group from SASP. So our stressful situations is urging students to apply to different opportunities. The stressor that we came up with is that the university and outside opportunities don't have inclusive programs for students with different statuses. So we think that creating more inclusive programs, either within the university or even outside programs, that includes all students with varying immigration statuses, will help ease that stress.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, one example that's brought up often in these kinds of trainings is undocumented students are not able to study abroad. So what does it mean to create opportunities where they're still able to go somewhere else outside of in the state, outside of the state, and connect with other spaces? So I used to work at the University of Arizona, and in the University of Arizona, we had a spring break kind of activity where specifically for low-income students of color in the cultural centers, and they would go to Navajo Nation. They would go to Philadelphia. They would go to different spaces for a week, take a class, and also engage with the opportunity to get to know different spaces. And it didn't limit them based off status, because they were also mindful of what traveling to those spaces looks like. So that's also kind of a creative way of engaging in these kinds of things. So that's a great point. Thank you. Oh, wait, before, I know other folks had their hands up, but I wanted someone from financial aid to answer this question. Oh, okay.
I was thinking a stressor could be today being denied for state aid, and as you know how we elicit that stressor. I thought of us not knowing or knowing of other sources or having any other resources um, to provide. And so I thought that as a way to combat that, we could, become more familiar with other scholarships, Dream US, um, payment arrangements, work with the school, and certainly confirming the ineligibility, in this case HESC, before proceeding through those.
Yeah, thank you. I think getting to know different scholarship opportunities is really important. When I've provided this training to different financial aid offices, I'll often ask them, like, what are some other scholarships undocumented students can apply to that you know of? And the room is silent. And so folks don't know. So how to empower yourself to look for those resources. Absolutely. So we're gonna have to move on because we're already short on time. Okay. No, I think we're gonna move on. So we're gonna go over Undocu Health and specifically as it impacts undocumented students with regards to health. So serving the mental health needs of undocumented students. Like we talked about, stressors can impact the mental health of undocumented students. There's financial stress and pressure, working low-paying jobs for very long hours, often primarily in service sector or food sector roles. Not having access to health benefits or mental health providers, so not being readily accessible for folks. Feelings of hopelessness because of societal impacts or stereotypes. So we see this on the news. The president talks about it all the time. Stereotyping and dehumanizing people. Fear of sharing status and exposing their family. So every time a student may share their status with you, they are negotiating if that's a safe thing for them to do, because that also implicates their family. Fear or hesitancy of being referred to outside agencies. I already said that. Fear of being referred to outside agencies. So just as they don't know if they can trust you, if you refer them to some agency outside of campus or even in another department, they're not sure if they can trust them. So often what I practice is I'll connect them to a person, not a department. And that person I already know is going to be trustworthy, and I already know they're going to be able to help them. And facing limitations in academic and career opportunities. So we talked about this throughout the training. What also happens is that we fetishize the immigrant undocumented dreamer experience. And I use dreamer intentionally in this way, in that you always hear in the news like the Harvard graduate who's undocumented, who's doing all these things despite their status. And so then that places these high level of expectations that unless you are like striving for Harvard, unless you are attending these elite institutions, that you're the only person worthy of having this acclaim and being supported. But we have students who are navigating different things, who are entering different institutions that need to be just as supported, not just the ones that are getting these accolades. So be mindful. How can you begin to identify if maybe your student might be undocumented? And I highlight this not so that you can ask them if they're undocumented and not so that you can target them, but so that you can think, oh, maybe I need to provide these additional resources so that they are also aware of them. So if your student uses a passport or a school ID as the main form of identification, if a student is scared or hesitant to travel. So the honors program here, they're in Alabama right now doing a trip. There are some undocumented students in the honors program who were hesitant to go because they were worried about what it would mean to be undocumented and going into Alabama, because Alabama has really different criminalization policies when it comes to marginalized groups there. So that could also be kind of a hint that my student may be undocumented. Student is working long hours and has many roles on campus. They are showing low motivation to perform well in school, so they don't have a postgraduate plan because they don't know if they're going to be able to succeed in their postgraduate plan. But also high performing. So often undocumented students will immerse themselves in so many extracurricular activities because they're trying to prove themselves, because this is the way that they formed community. So keeping that in mind too, that students may be identifying in that way as well. And a hesitancy to participate for programs that they qualify for. So SEEK being a clear example of that, because it requires TAP and or FAFSA to apply to SEEK. Other programs may also have similar application processes and they would be eligible except for immigration status. And so in our center, we have Luz Bertadillo, who provides one-on-one consultation and counseling for undocumented students from our center. And she has been a great resource to undocumented students there. She has direct experience, both professionally and personally, that make her really approachable for students. Do you have a question? Can what? Well, this is only for John Jay students. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so if you want these kinds of resources, what campus are you in? So BMCC needs a center. Yeah. I'm just saying. Yes. Yeah. So this is part of one of those efforts. So it's being recorded so that it can be shared on the website so that folks have access to an Undocu-Ally training in addition to the New York Dream Act information that was provided earlier today. There is some conversations and some steps to making that happen. Part of which I'm part of the conversation. Other folks here are part of that conversation as well. So hopefully something concrete comes out of it soon. I definitely highlight that every campus should have one of these centers because your students are coming to me for questions. And I'm happy to provide them with support. I'm happy to do whatever I can. But just as you've been doing this for some groups, I'm sure a lot of you have been doing it for undocumented students or other groups. And so that's also things that need to be formalized so that students feel like they're being supported. Yeah. And so how to support undocumented students, knowing all of this information. So again, the proper term when referring to undocumented students' immigration status, you want to use undocumented, not alien, not any other term that is being used in the media. Just undocumented is a safe term, so long as students feel comfortable with that as well. Ask a student if it's okay to mention their immigration status when making a referral or introducing them. But you want to explain why that's important. So for example, when I refer students to the financial aid office, I specifically refer them to Michael Scaduto, and I explain, do you mind, like if they're coming from my office, it's pretty assumed that it's for an immigration related reason. But let's say I wasn't part of that office, and I know Michael Scaduto has been working with undocumented students in the past, then I would say, do you mind if I share your status through a phone conversation, not an email, so that he's aware of this. He's worked with undocumented students before. He knows what resources to provide. I've connected him with students in the past. Is this okay? And if the student says, yes, it's okay, then you can go ahead and do that. If they're like, no, I don't want him to know, then you don't share the immigration status. But that is an important step to include. Avoid blaming. So there's rhetoric of like, you shouldn't have come here, or it's your parents' fault, or why are you choosing to still come to CUNY if you have to pay so much money? You should just apply to college in your home country. Why didn't you apply to the DACA renewal sooner? It's expiring next week. These are things we don't want to say to our students because they're already navigating so many other stressors that this is an additional one that we're placing on them. Do not attempt to solve all of your students' problems. Empower yourself to connect the students to other resources. So you are not the only resource on campus. There are other people who can help too, either on your campus or off your campus. Empower yourself to seek that support. You're not expected to solve all the problems. And in that same vein, you don't want to tell the student everything is going to be okay because everything is not going to be okay. So you want to make sure that you're providing the realistic information that they need and also guiding them and letting them know it might be difficult to find scholarships because of your status, but you know what? Let's work on it together. Like we can figure this out. And engage in active listening as you would with any student that you're working with. So education. Plyler v. Doe is an important legislation to know with regards to undocumented students. It ties back into what I was saying, that education and immigration are intrinsically connected because of policy. So in 1982, Supreme Court case Plyler v. Doe decided that all students, regardless of immigration status, are guaranteed a K-12 education. However, this decision does not extend into higher education. It's just K-12. So we see that this creates a problem when working with undocumented students in higher education. We see the Plyler dilemma. So approximately 2.5 million undocumented youth in the United States. Over 120,000 are high school seniors every year. 100,000 graduate from high school every year. Of those, only 5 to 10% enroll in college every year. And of those, only 1 to 3% graduate. So we're seeing a large group of students promised K-12 education, but then when you get to higher education, that's not a promise anymore. That's an option. And so we see less students are graduating because they don't have resources, because they're impacted by policies outside of school, or because there isn't a support system on campus. What makes this more difficult is that states look really different. So this is not updated to show New York having the New York Dream Act because it's still light blue, but pretend New York is dark blue. And so the states that are dark blue have both in-state tuition available for undocumented students and state financial aid. The states that are in light blue only have in-state tuition, and the states that are in gray have different kinds of policies. And so we see that students are limited to the state that they migrate to, because often these requirements mean you have to have attended high school for 2 or more years or gotten a GED from that state. Just to kind of highlight, we talked about how like New York may not cooperate with ICE or Border Patrol, but we see here that New York is the most recent state to provide state aid. States have had this for years. An example, Texas was the first state to provide in-state tuition for undocumented students and to provide state aid. But New York is the last. So what does that mean when working in a state like New York, in a city like New York? Other states also look really different. So it's not listed on here, but Montana, Alabama, and Georgia are all states that ban undocumented students from enrolling in higher education. So they either ban all undocumented students, or they allow you, if you have DACA, and only to their private schools, not their public schools. So we see that different states function differently. And so that's also becomes really confusing. How are students, or how are you supposed to search information if you may end up running into information from Arizona that doesn't apply to New York? So things to keep in mind. I have a handout for this that I'll hand out later so you all can have this image with you. I have this slide specifically for John Jay, but I think it's equal, if not more or less, in your campuses. But John Jay student population, this was information from a CUNY First survey in 2016. They asked the question, if students, what is their immigration status? That question is no longer being asked on CUNY First. It was removed after Trump was elected for obvious reasons, because the campus schools can be subpoenaed for this information, and they have. It happened the second time after 9/11. And so the question asked, what is your immigration status? Specifically using labels like alien permanent, alien temporary. But what this really means is highlighted on the side. So 57 students in 2016 at John Jay identified as having asylum, almost 200 identified as having DACA, almost 1,200 identified as legal permanent residents. So this is a pathway to citizenship. Over 200 self-identified as undocumented, and 200 were missing from the data. Because of the nature of the question, because of the population, we can assume that those 200 are likely undocumented as well. So we have between 300 to 500 undocumented students at John Jay. However, this was in 2016. This was before the center existed. This was before John Jay Dreamers is a pretty active dream team here on campus. This is before the center was in existence, and this is before a lot of student activism occurred. So it was around 2016, between 2016 and 2018, where students began advocating for the creation of the center here at John Jay. And so we expect these numbers to be significantly higher now. So the numbers are comparable to your campuses, is my point. But the numbers here have likely increased because there are students who are trying to attend John Jay because of the center. So I already helped some students transfer, and I already help a lot of high school students apply to John Jay, specifically because they're looking for a resource on campus. This is a group that already knows this, but federal financial aid eligibility is not accessible for undocumented students. They cannot apply, should not apply to FAFSA. That's the final verdict because of this current administration. It's inequitable for them to not have access to FAFSA, considering that the Pell Grant covers 63% of the average public four-year institution tuition fees at a college, and 170% for the average public two-year institution fees. So that's undocumented students don't have access to that kind of financial aid, makes it really difficult for them to attend college. So kind of a brief summary: barriers to higher education, financial barriers, so not being able to afford it, citizenship questions, so often students are being asked if they're a citizen or not, restrictions, so whether they can apply to internships or not, balancing, negotiating what they want versus what is possible, and a lack of opportunities. The New York DREAM Act is now available. Some folks here are not in the financial aid office, so I'll go over it briefly. It passed just last year in January 23rd. It allows undocumented students, T visa, U visa, TPS, and students without lawful status, including DACA, to receive TAP. And there's a specific eligibility requirement. I also have a document for that I'll hand out later. There is no pathway to citizenship with the New York State DREAM Act. That is not a rhetoric that we want to be sharing. It's state administered, gives access to students to TAP, Excelsior, and Enhanced Tuition Award. specifically for the students listed, so undocumented, DACA, TPS, U visa, T visa, and folks with lawful immigration status. Who is eligible? Someone with a permanent home in New York State that falls under any of these statuses. Someone with a permanent home that's not in New York State that falls under any of these statuses. And so long as they either one, attended a New York State high school for 2 or more years and graduated, or received a New York State equivalency, school equivalency, or are charged in-state tuition for any reason other than residency. For the first two, you have to have applied. Right now they're saying enrolled, but there's a debate about it being applied or enrolled to attend a New York State college, so SUNY or CUNY, within 5 years of graduating or receiving the equivalency. Again, I have a worksheet that I'll hand out so that you all can read up on it. There's still some regulations and implementations that are being debated, but any information will be shared out once it's assured. Oh, so my next question, can anyone tell me any scholarships that are open to undocumented students?
I can share one. We have the CUNY Cap program, which is actually funds to go to graduate school. They pay your whole 6 credits of graduate tuition. It's kind of open to undocumented students as long as they can work.
So DACA.
Exactly.
Okay,
As
so
long as
only
they can
DACA
work.
eligible.
So, and it's and international students who also can work. So, and it's considered a scholarship.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a waiver. It's a tuition waiver. It's called CUNY Cap for all CUNY students who have a bachelor's degree from CUNY and are attending a CUNY school for graduate studies.
And
We
have
pay.
DACA?
We give them a waiver for 6 credits.
Yeah.
But they have to be able. They have to work, and so DACA students can work, and I have some international students who have F1 visas. Yeah. So
Yeah. Yeah, if that's the case, then absolutely. I'm interested in that a little bit more because I've heard. Yes, yeah, that was mentioned. Macaulay Honors has been accessible before New York Dream. Anything else? Folks don't know any scholarships? What do you tell your students when they ask for support? You don't have a scholarship? Oh, okay. Okay, that's a good example. So internal scholarships at John Jay, I tell folks, if there's a scholarship at John Jay that doesn't explicitly say that you need to be a citizen to apply, you are eligible. So apply. If it asks you for FAFSA, then come talk to me, because then I can talk to the financial aid office to figure out how we can make it a TAP eligible and not a FAFSA eligible. Any other scholarships? So here are some. Yes, Dream.us, CUNY Becas was mentioned, Hispanic Scholarship Fund. At John Jay, we have financial support, but it's only for John Jay students. Make the Road has scholarships. The New York State Youth Leadership Council has a scholarship. And Immigrants Rising has a whole scholarship list just for undocumented folks, both in undergraduate and graduate. MALDEF also has one, so the Mexican American Legal Defense Fund has one. These are things to just have helpful on hand so you can refer students to while you look for more resources, because that's part of our job. Cool. One last thing about the New York Dream Act. The bill was written by undocumented youth from the New York State Youth Leadership Council in 2010 after the failure of the Federal Dream Act. So I highlight this point because often we think that it's our politicians, council members, or legislators that write these bills, but this was written by undocumented youth. So it's important to let other undocumented youth know so that they're aware that this is a product of that labor. They're available on social media, so you can follow them for more information. And again, our center offers specifically resources to empower undocumented DACA, TPS, immigrant students at John Jay to succeed, graduate, and thrive. Anything from DACA renewals, one-on-one appointments, deportation defense. So we do have a listserv of lawyers that we reach out to send immediate legal support. So if they receive a deportation order, we have an Instagram. Please follow us. for more resources. And we just moved into a large office space, so we have more resources now. The last thing that I'm going to go over, and I'll breeze through it, is policies. So these are policies that impact undocumented students outside of school that are also important to know, because these are the things that they're navigating, and then they come here and they also have to navigate it here. Work authorization being one of them, so that was something that we've been talking about the entire time. Because of processes like E-Verify, undocumented folks are not able to be on payroll. They are still able to work, but they just can't be on payroll. But what E-Verify essentially does is that it puts the accountability onto the employee, not the employer. So if someone hires someone who's undocumented, the employee could be deported, the employer gets a slap on the wrist. And so what that causes is more abuse at the workplace with regards to undocumented folks. The 286G program, so that's one of ICE's top partnership initiatives, allows state and local law enforcement to enter into partnership with ICE. So this is what I was referring to. So who deports? Border Patrol, ICE, and the police. As a note, the Department of Homeland Security was created in 2001 as a response to 9/11. As a response to 9/11, Islamophobia and xenophobia. So it didn't exist. ICE didn't exist prior to that. Only INS, which is an institution that doesn't necessarily need to exist. 3 departments under DHS: ICE, which is responsible for enforcement of migration policies and identification and removal of individuals. USCIS, which is responsible for the adjustments in status applications like DACA, naturalization, visas. They also increased the application, not just for DACA, but for applying for citizenship and legal permanent residency. And Customs and Border Protection. So they survey the border, they militarize it, hands over and apprehends any border crossers to ICE to begin removal proceedings. So how do these policies work with regards to police and ICE? Under the George Bush administration, secure communities impacted all immigrants and created distrust and violence in immigrant communities. How did it do this? When an individual is arrested, fingerprints and identification are taken at the jail. During the arrest, fingerprints are shared with federal agencies, FBI, DHS, and ICE. ICE would then ask the police to hold any individual that they believed was undocumented. They would hold that individual beyond the length of their jail terms until they could be transferred into federal custody. And so this was anybody that they thought could be undocumented. The Obama administration came in and replaced secure communities with priority enforcement program. What this means is that most people who have been convicted in the criminal justice system would be streamlined into deportation. Everybody else would not. What does this look like? Individual is arrested, fingerprints and identification are taken at the time at the jail. The individual, if they have been previously convicted of a serious crime or pose a national threat, they would then be identified to ICE or the FBI, and then deportation proceedings would begin from there. But no one who didn't have a serious crime prior to that. However, when the Trump administration came in, he brought back secure communities and removed priority enforcement program. But what that means is that priority enforcement program created a very direct line of deportation between time of arrest and contact with ICE. So now that that's no longer available and anyone can be taken into custody by ICE, it's causing quicker deportations. Although I do want to highlight that it was under the Obama administration that most folks were deported in the history of since ICE had been in existence. But the Trump administration has also been deporting a lot of folks too. But New York State has more than 40 counties currently enrolled in secure communities. What did this look like since 2016? 150% increase in deportations in New York City since 2016. 256% increase in deportations for those with no prior criminal conviction. This is the largest increase of any major city in the country. 88% increase in overall ICE arrests. This is the 3rd highest increase in any major city in the United States. 20% of all immigrant court cases in New York City are Chinese immigrants. Additionally, 10% are Indian. These are the numbers from the Comptroller's Office from earlier this year. So we see that ICE is collaborating with the police, because they're enrolled in secure communities, leading to higher rates of deportation than a lot of major cities in the country. What I also want to highlight from this is that the concentration of these pickups of these raids are happening in Queens, specifically in Elmhurst, Corona, and Jackson Heights, which is where a lot of John Jay students live. I also want to highlight that policies work intrinsically together, right? So there's a lot of gentrification happening in Queens right now, specifically in the three parts that I just mentioned. So what does it mean when folks are being pushed out economically, but also are being picked up by ICE? And so then we talk about this conversation of like, oh, well, then why aren't folks applying for citizenship status, or why aren't they coming through a line? So what is this line exactly? There is no line, spoiler alert, but some examples of ways in which folks are able to apply that are still very limited. One is employment green cards. So the primary benefit of this is high skilled professionals with high levels of education. There is a 5,000 cap per year for unskilled or low skilled workers, quote unquote. There's also diversity visas. 5,500 green cards are available in a lottery, but only to countries that have low rates of immigration to the United States. So that's not the Philippines, that's not Mexico, that's like some random country in Europe. Family immigration. US citizens can petition for spouses and parents, children and siblings, but that process is complicated and it's often impossible or takes 20 to 40 years. One quick example, when we immigrated to California, my grandmother had citizenship through the Amnesty Act, but we were undocumented. And so my mom petitioned for citizenship for her and for us through my grandmother. We've been waiting. I was able to get citizenship through different means, and they called us, I think, like a year ago to say, "Oh, your case is ready for review." It's been 23 years, and then well, I'm a citizen already, and they're like, "Oh, okay, never mind." So this process, there is no logic to it, which is again back to the comprehensive immigration reform. And political refugees. So you have to show a well-founded fear of persecution. It's not open to economic refugees, and the well-founded fear of persecution is constantly being shifted. So there was conversations with former Attorney General Sessions about removing sexual assault or rape as a well-founded fear. So when these things are changing, who is able to apply? Who has access to these things? Yeah, no one yet. So I have this handout that I'll also hand out while you all are filling out the last part of the assessment. It's essentially a guide for you to kind of walk yourself through to see if you would have been able to immigrate to the United States. It's very comprehensive and really details out what are the limitations to being able to come here. It's important as allies to report any kind of ICE activity in your community, to make sure that it's being documented, to make sure people aren't being picked up under false pretenses. This is a number that you can call to report ICE activity. There is an online guide of where all the raids are happening, just so folks are aware and resources can be sent to those spaces. And know your rights. I think it's important to have information of know your rights available in your offices, regardless of what office you work in, so folks know that they have rights. This is one that we created. You don't need this one. Every organization has created a know your rights guide. If you Google it, if you look it up, find the one that makes the most sense to your office. There's different kinds, from driving to walking to being in jail and all of these things. I welcome you to look it up. You already have one with you. If you look at the pen that I gave you, it has a little banner. So if you open it up, that has know your rights information on it. So now you have that with you, and did some people not get a pen? Oh no, qué sad. Okay, I'll bring some. I'll bring more. But it has a little banner if you open it up, and it shows know your rights information on there. It also has deportation defense hotline numbers on the back, and you're able to write your attorney's number on it as well. So I know I talked a lot about whether it can be triggering things, whether it can be content heavy things. I want to highlight that although this is difficult to engage with, difficult to learn, difficult to read up on, as allies, it is important for you to read up on it. Your students shouldn't have to educate you on these things. You need to educate yourself on these things. So I encourage you all to empower yourselves to look for this information so that you're aware of it and your students don't have to teach you about it. But additionally to that, I also I'm mindful of how often we frame the undocumented immigrant experience as what the video refers to as a doom and gloom narrative. But I also want to highlight that there's a lot of work being done both in New York and across the country to allow UndocuJoy to flourish, to thrive despite these kinds of circumstances. So we're going to watch a very brief video that just highlights a little bit of that before we close off.
I love my undocumented people. I love us because every day we wake up to a country that hates us. We wake up, give thanks to God, and go to work. Watch the news, hear how our own TVs vilify us. We change the channel and pray that tomorrow will be a better day for us. When they give us a little breathing room, we make the most of it. We're so grateful that often we forget we deserve better. That all this mess is not our fault. We stay low on the radar. Want peace. Want to exist without the added stress of having to be public about where our spirits ache. We just want to go to work to feed our families, yet we become scapegoats to a system that is addicted to exploiting the poor. I love my undocumented people because the way our spirits are toyed with, you need some unfathomable strength. I love us because we have constantly had to prove our humanity and constantly done it beautifully. Because to stay human under these conditions, you have to have an understanding of beauty. I love us. Even when our stories are manipulated and exploited. Even when we are presented as gloom and doom narratives. I love us. Because at the end of the day, somehow we always manage to make something out of nothing. I love my undocumented people because being undocumented is not political, it's not physical, it is a condition created to keep us from smiling. But look at us, thriving.
Continue to stay informed. These are some Instagram pages that you can follow, that you can encourage your students to follow, to stay aware of some of the resources. It's the last thing that I'll say before I close off the presentation is, as you folks who participate in this training are part of a network at John Jay that is identified as Undocu-Allies. And so now that you participated in this training, I'll be able to hand this out to you so you can have it available in your office. And so if you meet with students, students may see this and already identify you as someone who has received this training, who is aware of this information, who is empowering themselves to seek out more information, and is able to reach out to you for resources and opportunities. And so I'll hand this out along with the different documents as you fill out the last 2 pages of the assessment. But I do want to highlight that to be an ally is a verb. It's not a noun. So you can't say, cool, I did this training, I'm an ally now, check. It means I did this training, I'm going to empower myself to look for more resources, I'm going to be active in this search so I can continue to be an ally. And so if you believe in that, if you believe in continuing to look for these resources, I welcome you to take this If you're not sure, please don't. And so I'll hand this out and ask you all if you want to take this. But thank you so much for your time, for your attention. You all were very engaged. Yeah, thank you.